history.
We shall never surrender.
Politics.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony.
Current affairs.
Going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
Conspiracies.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
We'll stop terrorists from coming after us.
I just received a beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons.
I'm not guilty of harassing anyone.
Well, I'm not a crook.
This is the Political Darkside podcast. And now, here's your host, Matthew Howland.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
So with the Scottish Council elections coming up on May the 5th, I decided to reach out to the leader of the Scottish Libertarian Party, Mr. Tam Laird, and I'm pleased to say he's taken the time to join me today to talk politics. How are you, Tam?
I'm good, thanks, all things considered. Thanks for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. So you've undergone a bit of a political transition, or perhaps more accurately, you've come to an understanding of the current landscape and formed your opinions accordingly. I have massive sympathy for this journey, as personally I feel like I would previously have engaged in party politics and picked a side, as it were. But certainly the last few years have exposed the inherent flaws in mainstream political parties. As such, and maybe for lack of a better phrase, fringe parties are increasing in popularity. You yourself have regularly appeared on GB News, for example. Can you explain a bit about how you reached your political standing?
Well, like you've mentioned, it took a long time. I think the gradual realization that the government, whoever the government is, no matter who I voted for in the past, I ended up with a government. And it seemed to me that regardless of whatever political hue or colour they came in, I seemed to end up with the same policies going through. They will tax you. They will spend your money on things you disagree with, vehemently disagree with. And they will screw you over. They don't have your best interests at heart. They have the interests of the banks, financial institutions, corporations, that's their paymasters. That's who put them where they are. That's who paid for their campaigns. That's who donated, and they owe them favors in the end. And regardless of what political party they reside in, career politicians only care about one thing, and that's their own stinking lousy career. Just like career politicians, career policemen, career soldiers, career anything else. That's the focus of their entire. They don't care about you. So the only way really the only solution to that, there's no solutions really, there's only trade-offs in the end. So the best trade-off possible is to try and make government as small as you possibly can, preferably non-existent. So that's really how I arrived in the place where I became a libertarian, and then not long after, personally, adopting an anarcho-capitalist position. Although the party itself retains a minarchist position, of course it does. Otherwise, there'd be no point in it existing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what you're saying, I often think the best embodiment of that is probably Keir Starmer, who supposedly, he's meant to represent this leftist party, but ultimately, he might as well just be a Tory for all things considered. I mean, he's
and vice
versa. He's a strange one. I mean, at least one of I mean, at least one thing you could say for Jeremy Corbyn was at least you almost believed in his in the conviction of the things he was saying, regardless of the actual content of them. But you believed he believed them. So,
yeah, well, he should be convicted for some of his beliefs. But, well, not for his beliefs, but for wanting to act on them. Basically. Yeah, I get what you mean. There's people on the left who go, well, at least they actually do believe and they have some principles. Now, I might believe those principles are screwed up. I think they're dangerous principles, but at least they have them. When somebody's principled, they can at least be convinced that those principles are wrong and convinced that another principle is right. Whereas if somebody has no principle other than the furtherance of their own career, there's very little you can do for somebody like that, you know. So with Corbyn, yeah, at least he has principles, and there are some areas where I agree with him. Unfortunately, in those areas where we don't agree is property rights. Jeremy Corbyn has made it absolutely plain that, you know, if you have 2 houses, he's going to come and take one off you. So he believes government should be able to appropriate people's property at will. And it's not long after that, you know, if you've got 2 rooms in your house, you know, and he thinks that's too much for you, he's going to come and take one of those rooms off you and give it to somebody else. So, yeah, completely screwed up in terms of his principles. But, yeah, at least he has some, and you know what you're dealing with somebody like that, at least. Yeah.
I often find the best way to understand political theories through practical examples. So what I'd like to do is look back over the events of the last couple of years and maybe have you explain the libertarian opinions and perhaps your personal opinions, and that way the listeners can decide for themselves if they find these responses and ideas to be appealing, as it were. So I suppose we should start with the big one, and that's COVID-19. It's difficult to have this conversation without straying into what we are gaslit into thinking is conspiracy theory. So regardless of the rights and wrongs of some of those theories, I suppose we can only take the face value of the government response. So what's your interpretation of how governments behaved initially with lockdowns?
Well, I suppose you could make a case that initially we did not know what we were dealing with. You could make that case. I know there's all sorts of good arguments as to why that wasn't the case, but let's take a charitable point of view and say, well, the government didn't know what it was dealing with in the first couple of weeks. I think that excuse wore out pretty rapidly. I think the best way forward would have been to take the route that Sweden took, and I'm not a big fan of Sweden in all sorts of areas. Before anybody thinks I'm a Swedophile, they did at least, I think, get this. Yeah, they did at least get this right. And the solution, like most things, was less government involvement. If you wanted to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you wanted to stay in your house and not go to work, stay in your house and don't go to work. If you wanted to keep your club open or your pub open or your business open, keep it open. If you wanted to shut it down, shut it down. You take the decisions for your life. And the mandates, I think it's beyond any kind of argument or serious argument. The mandates, the lockdowns caused more issues and caused more damage in the long run than the virus itself did. You know, and as we know, we were disinformed, if not misinformed, by the government on the in fact, it was disinformed. They knew they were lying when they put the figures out about the deaths. They knew they were lying. They knew they were scaring people. They've admitted they were trying to scare people, and that's with all due respect to people who've lost loved ones with this thing. Yes, it's killed quite a lot of people. It's killed no more people than a bad flu epidemic, really. And the solution was to allow people to make their own choices. Rather than government mandating rules and laws that it had not itself really thought through, and caused the massive damage to the economy. And people go, oh, the economy, you care more about the economy than people's lives. The economy is people's lives. The economy is putting food on the table. The economy is paying for their energy bills. The economy is them being able to earn a living. And had the government not provided free tests and given people free printed funny money as furlough, I think the crisis would have been over within a couple of months, because people just could not afford to carry on, and people would have made their own decisions, their own risk assessment, you know, what they had to do, whether it was go to work or stay in their house. You know, and there was plenty of people, you know, moaning about it. Moaning about people not staying in the house. They had the ability to do that. You know, they had the ability to stay at home, work from their computer, and get poor people to bring them stuff, you know, from Amazon. And it's really only enriched. Those same people complain about how much money Jeff Bezos has got. And those are the people who enriched them by calling for lockdowns and calling for the extension of the lockdown. They enriched people like Jeff Bezos. They turned him into a trillionaire by preventing other businesses, small businesses and medium-sized businesses, by being able to trade. So it was a massive disaster. And it's a disaster, as usual, of government design and government making.
Yeah, I do hope people remember that when they actually go to vote next month. But people do seem to have short memories, especially the ones that've got new distractions. But
yeah, they have extraordinarily short memories. I have been shocked. Even I would regard myself as some sort of, you know, sort of grizzled, weathered, you know, jaded political activist. You know, nothing surprises me about, well, not surprises me about government, and nothing surprises me about people. However, some of the people you would call, say, on our side of the camp, or seemed to be, and like, you know, they got it. You know, they knew that government was gaslighting them. Suddenly, it's like Gelman amnesia, you know, effect. There's, you know, for people who don't know about the Gelman amnesia effect, is Gelman was a particle physicist who one day was reading an article in the front of the newspaper about particle physics, or about physics, which was his field, and he realized the person who's writing this article has absolutely no grasp on the facts or anything to do with what he's talking about. So he then turns the page over to the newspaper and starts reading an article about Syria or Libya or the Middle East. And he starts reading it as if he's reading facts. He's going, oh, yeah, you know, blah, blah, that must be right. And suddenly the penny drops. He goes, hang on a minute. Why do I suddenly think that the person writing this article in the Middle East is any better informed than the person who wrote the article on the subject that I'm familiar with? And that's the Gelman amnesia effect. And it's extraordinary. That seems to be what happened with the British population. They've suddenly forgot that the media lied to them for the last 2 years, gaslit them and disinformed them, and at the same time also locked them down and you know, put these draconian, absolutely inhuman measures and enforced them on people. And yet suddenly it's all over, you know, especially in England where all the mandates seem to have gone away. And people, well, it's okay now, you know, we can relax, we can go back to sleep and just read our paper and assume everything that the government tells us about Ukraine is absolutely right. And that's extraordinary. I'm even shocked by that, and I never thought I could say that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's the cognitive dissonance of people like they don't want to acknowledge what it actually means to consider that the government has been intentionally disinforming them for the past longer.
Yeah,
it leads you down pretty dark routes ultimately, and like I said about conspiracy theories earlier, like not that I don't enjoy them and buy into them, I just want to stray away from them in this particular context, if that makes sense, because I don't want you to be tarnished with that particular brush, as it were.
Well, yeah, I agree.
With that said, what about vaccine? Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, what about vaccine mandates? With that said,
well, I didn't. Well, I'm against mandates, you know, and I'm certainly against the vaccine mandate. It's a breach of all sorts. Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of human rights. You know, we can go into that later. But if I'm not a fan of them at all. But these people are the same people who hold up human rights as the standard that they ascribe to. Yet they happily trampled human rights down with the vaccine mandates. Now, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Now, I know I'm wasting my breath saying that, because they have changed the definition of anti-vax to somebody who even had the vaccine but still doesn't believe that it should be mandated, you know, that you're an anti-vaxxer. So I guess I have to wear that badge with pride. But I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe, take vaccines. You know, that I can make an informed decision if I think that, you know, that the cost-benefit analysis of taking a vaccine is better than not taking it. But my assessment on this one was I didn't need it. And I think I've been vindicated in that. You know, it's like 2.5 years in. I believe I've had it. You know, I've had all the symptoms. I've been down with it. I haven't really been as bad as other people. Some people who've even had the vaccine have had really bad COVID. So you can assume that I've had it and I've got over it and I'm fine, or I'm some weird kind of guy who, despite not having a vaccine 2.5 years later, I've managed to avoid that despite having worked all the way through, because I was a key worker, you know. So I worked all the way through. I wasn't locked down completely.
Yeah,
at
me
home.
too.
So I'm mixing with people from all backgrounds. And the job I do, I'm in contact with dirt, effluent, you know, and I'm working in areas that have been populated by people. So it's almost extraordinary to believe that I haven't had it, you know. So either way, it's extraordinary. Bottom line.
Yeah, especially when you look at the ONS figures where they say 90% or so have got it at any given moment or whatever.
Yeah.
Or,
so I mean,
you know, people like us who have been
bottom
out
line
the whole
is,
time, there's no way we've avoided it.
Yeah, you want a vaccine, have a vaccine, and if somebody doesn't want one, don't let them have one. Sorry, don't allow them their bodily autonomy. I think that was ingrained in the Nuremberg Code, which again they just ignored. You know, this idea. You know, the statists will often say, "Well, you know, who'll make laws? You know, who's going to protect your rights?" Well, the government seldom protects your rights. The government, more often than not, tramples down your natural or God-given rights, whichever way you want to look at those. So, yeah.
Are you familiar with the band? Can you still hear me?
I'm still here, yeah, but I lost you for a moment there. You've frozen time.
Oh, okay, great. Are you familiar with the band the Sleaford Mods?
I'm aware of them. I'm not familiar with their stuff. Aren't they kind of like the Sultans of Ping, or in the sense that they're a kind of parody type band, or are they? I'm not sure.
Kind of, but they take themselves quite seriously. You know, there's been like an anti-government thing.
Right.
So I was meant to go and see them, and this would have been at the height of Scotland's vaccine passport craze. So I tweeted something along the lines of, ironic, I can't go see the anti-government of the government. And they replied to me telling me to grow up and go get the vaccine. And then sure enough, everybody piled in on me. And there was comments along the lines of like, people like you don't deserve to go to gigs and stuff like that. And it's just like, how did we... Well, the government obviously has very intentionally divided the public into those sort of opinions. And it's quite clear, really, that could be possible.
I mean, but what if you want to go to a gig for people who believe the same thing that you do? Like, so you've got a band that's, let's say, who don't believe that you should be vaccinated. You've got a crowd that don't believe you should be vaccinated. You've got, you know, bouncers who don't believe you should be vaccinated. Why should we all not be allowed to go to that gig? You know, I mean, I'm perfectly happy for venues to make their own decisions on these things. You know, if venues decided they weren't going to let unvaccinated in. If bands decided they weren't going to, I mean, that's fine. Then you can make your own decision of whether you want to follow that band anymore, or whether you want to go to that venue, or whether you want to open up your own venue. I mean, again, in a libertarian society, we could do this. You wouldn't have, you know, you could just go, right, we're just going to have anybody who likes going to music, we're going to have a music festival in a piece of private land, and everybody's invited. However, if you did that in our society, you know, the council would come around with a clipboard and some men with sticks and beat you over the head and make you shut it down. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, something strange has happened with like the free flow of information and censorship. I mean, it seems that there are voices out there who are regularly attacked for trying to present different angles to the COVID story, and people like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, Dr. Campbell. How does that play into the idea of freedom of speech and censorship for you?
Well, it's important because if you can't speak, you can't really think out loud. You know, you can't. There's no debate, and that's extremely unhealthy. And it's for people who don't think it's under threat. You know, the online safety bill that the government is trying to quietly push through Parliament, while the shiny things going on over there in Ukraine. Here, watch this while we're doing. Watch the evil dictator Vladimir Putin, while the evil dictators in this country are busily making legislation to shut you down and stop you from speaking. So if the online safety bill goes through, that's an attack. I mean, what the government's doing, and I don't know if it's a reaction or whether it was planned anyway. They are saying that, okay, what was all the things that made the lockdown? How did we fail? How did we fail to shut people up? How did we fail to stop them gathering? How did we fail to stop them protesting? How did we fail to censor information? And how did we fail in our mission to stop them from exposing us, doing what we were doing and exposing the lies? Well, there was online. Most of it was online. So much in the same way that the Catholic Church tried to ban the printing press because that was a method of disseminating information, pointing out the hypocrisies in that organization and pointing out the hypocrisies in governments that were closely associated with them. Now, the new printing press is the internet. And under the guise of online safety, the government is now trying to shut that down. It's tightening up all those loopholes that allowed us to be able to counteract government propaganda in the past. And that's the real intention of the online safety bill. I'm sure there's some people that are clamoring for it who honestly believe it's about safety and protecting our women folk, from harm. But that's garbage. It's really about shutting you down. That's what the online safety bill is about. It's the online censorship bill, really. So if that has to be stopped, if it isn't, we're in trouble. That in tandem with we'll probably discuss this but that in tandem with CBDCs, centralized banking digital currencies, those two things together, if they're not stopped within the next couple of years, that's game over. That's a scary thought, but that's game over. That's game, set, and match to the state, really.
I've seen clips of Rishi Sunak talking about central bank digital currency.
Today, I'm proud to say that under the UK's presidency, the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money, a bit like a digital banknote that could be used alongside physical notes and coins. Unlike most of the digital money people use daily today, it would be issued directly by a central bank, like the Bank of England in the UK. And governments and central banks across the world are working together, looking into what having a digital currency might mean in practice. This includes issues that people care about, such as ensuring users' money would be safe and secure, that it could work with other ways to pay, would be energy efficient and available to everyone.
And then, almost within the same day, mainstream news reporters denying that, it's a long-term plot from the World Economic Forum. It's like they tell you they're doing it on the one hand, and then also tell you you're crazy for realizing that they're doing it. And it's
classic.
It's very difficult to operate in this space at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's classic gaslighting. Yeah. I mean,
obviously we've got a narrow. Sorry, on you go.
Yeah, there's a pattern that consistently appears, and whether it's politicians or whether it's the guy you're talking to in the pub or members of your own family, and you say, look, this is happening. You know, this is what they're going to do, and it's like, first of all, they laugh at you, like, it's like, oh, you know, that's just nonsense. You know, stop reading the Daily Mail, stop doing that. You know, stop listening to idiots and tinfoil hats. Then finally, then the next phase is, well, okay, it's happening, but it's not what you think, right? And it's not as bad as you think. Then finally, when you confront them with the irrefutable proof, what they say is, well, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that anyway. I think it's a good idea, and they're doing it for good reasons. So you go, well, what was the denial about then? You know, why did you consistently now you're just pole vaulting over the fact by saying, well, you agree with it. Well, if you agree with it now, why didn't you agree with it? Why did you ridicule when I said, you know, and this is the constant pattern. And politicians do it, the media does it, and the people generally round about you do it as well. You have to realize that's a pattern that they do. Stonewall, you know, stonewall all the way, ridicule you, then concede some points, but it's happening for good reasons, but it's not what you think it is. And in the end, when you present the irrefutable proof, well, we agree with it anyway. You know, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I've been saying for a while now there's going to be a complete economic meltdown on the horizon, and it seems to be playing out in front of our eyes. I mean, there's obviously a lot of economic hardship, and the narrative that's spun to us is that it's Russia's fault. I mean, of course, it's because money was printed out of any sort of value 2 years ago. And one of the things I've found to be a sticking point in libertarianism is economic welfare. How does a libertarian government respond to the rise in fuel prices, the inflation? I mean, I suppose we might not be in the situation in the first place with a libertarian government, but how can it be resolved 100%. Or at least mitigated against?
Well, first of all, it doesn't do any good to print money in order to try and supposedly alleviate things. First of all, there is no cost of living crisis. There is a cost of government incompetence crisis. This is the chickens all coming home to roost. And it's government's business to try and convince you that there's some sort of sudden crisis that's caused that. Now, whether it was COVID, now it's Ukraine and the Russia situation. But any wise person with half a brain could have realized, if you're reliant on a country that we may or may not have issues with at some point in the future for your energy needs, that's going to present a problem at some point. You should know that and act accordingly. So we should have been allowing homegrown energy to flourish, fracking, other energy forms out with it. And I've nothing necessarily against green energy other than it doesn't work. But if you want to, if people want to develop that privately and come up with something that actually does work, then that's fantastic. So not preventing homegrown energy sources. We're sitting still with plenty of fossil fuel energy. There's no reason not to use it other than we've hobbled ourselves with a lot of green mumbo jumbo, you know, environmentalism. So the immediate way to resolve it would be to allow more companies to get involved in energy creation, diversify that market, and make energy cheaper that way. And that's the same for any resource, whether it's food, medical treatment, or anything else, or housing. You know, anything that at this moment in time that costs a whole ton of money and drives people into almost poverty. I mean, I don't think people are in poverty at the moment, but it can come. We could get there if the government continues with this insanity. So the first thing to do is get government out of there. And if that happens, then we'll start to, and definitely stop it from printing money. Take away the government's monopoly on currency, on money. Get back to sound money based on whether it's oil, metals, but something tangible as opposed to fiat currency, which is part of the reason we're in this. In fact, maybe the main reason we're in this situation as it is. So the solution is not welfare. The solution is to allow people to have autonomy over their own lives and businesses and get on with things. The market is far more capable of sorting this out than the government is. The government is the one that got us into this mess. They will not get you out.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to a capitalist system, we haven't really experienced a functioning capitalist system. Certainly not recently, due to like various socialist policies and the inherent fraud and corruption that we combat. I mean, what mechanisms can be put in place to combat economic corruption? I mean, how do the markets operate in any way other than what would end up being monopoly on steroids, where the end game will be most of the resources in the hands of the few, much of the same as what's happening now?
Well, first of all, I would be so bold as to suggest that capitalism at its worst, even when it is crony capitalism, even when it's capitalism, is still infinitely better than socialism at its best. That's my view. I think that's demonstrable all over the world. That even poor people in capitalist countries tend to do better than moderately wealthy people, by other standards in socialist countries. In Cuba, for example, you've got surgeons. That's normally a well-paid job in a capitalist society. It's surgeons and doctors driving taxis because they can earn more money driving. They can earn tips at least, and tips in foreign currency at that, in order to alleviate the situation they're in, rather than working for the government. So I think capitalism, even capitalism at its worst, is better than socialism at its best. But yeah, it's still garbage and it needs to be improved. And the only way to do that is to get government out of it as much as we possibly can.
I suppose what I was getting to is how, if you go to a completely free market, how do you prevent the corruption from happening and, say, the capture of media and whatnot? Well, how is it resolved then?
Well, you don't prevent it in a sense. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell says. So monopolies can still exist, because providing it's two types of monopoly: a coercive monopoly and a efficiency monopoly. An efficiency monopoly is just somebody's just so good at what they do, and they do it so cheaply that nobody can compete with them. Well, that's good for the consumer.
Yeah.
A coercive monopoly, well, generally there's only two ways of doing that. You do it through violence, like the mafia, or you do it through government, which is a form of violence. It's just legitimized violence. So you do it through government. Most monopolies, by far and away, most monopolies arise with government help. Government creates the legislation that assists those monopolies. We've just mentioned an example. Jeff Bezos has become a trillionaire, and his empire has increased massively because of government assistance in terms of corporate welfare in his startups. Massive government assistance in terms of shutting down his competitors, or at least restricting his competitors' ability to trade while he had free reign because of his delivery methods. Now, that's a case of a coercive monopoly, because the government assisted him in order to be able to do that. So there is no way of preventing it. In terms of corruption, corruption is innate to human beings. You're never, ever going to get rid of corruption. But at least in markets, corruption is generally punished. Because if you're corrupt, if you get people skimming off the top, if you get people doing dodgy deals in your company that are not going to benefit the company and are not going to benefit the consumer, then that corruption will eventually ruin the company, and another company will take its place. So at least corruption within a free market, eventually, in the short to medium term, of course it can happen, but eventually it's punished. because it's not conducive. It's not good. You don't grow your company. You don't become an efficiency monopoly by allowing corruption. Corruption is better dealt with through the market than it is through government, because we still have it. We still have massive corruption with government. We have lobbying, which is just a legitimized form of corruption. You know, corporations lobby, you know, promise to deliver things to MPs and to senators and governors and to prime ministers and first ministers if they benefit them, if they make legislation that benefits them. And even you get it. You've seen examples of this where large corporations lobby both sides of the field, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what happens. They're big enough to take the hit of any taxation legislation or any other regulation that government might come out with. Large corporations are big enough to take the hit on that. It's the small and the medium-sized business who's always going to suffer because they can't afford to cope with the regulation. So in both senses, in both preventing monopoly or breaking up monopoly and anti-corruption, the market's a better solution than government.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a very real-world, realistic view of things. You know, you're not almost daydreaming that there's like a utopian solution there. It is very matter of fact. You know, it would correct itself because the removal of the government means we. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a more direct response from the public to remove the corruption.
Yeah, well, look, if you cannot remove the corruption from government, why would you be able to remove it from anywhere else? And we know that government is still corrupt. We've seen the scandals surrounding the PPE contracts, and the scandals are you know, Private Eye done a great. I urge anybody to have a look at this. Everybody thinks Private Eye is just a satirical magazine. They actually do a lot of proper investigative journalism, especially into corruption and cronyism, and they exposed massive billions of pounds worth of lobbying, corruption, government ministers involved in these companies that got contracts through COVID for PPE and the delivery of PPE. Many companies that don't even make PPE were suddenly doing it, or they're using third parties because it benefited their investors, and many of their investors were government ministers and government actors. So if you can't get rid of the corruption in government, you're wasting your time trying to get rid of it anywhere else. It's there. It's part of human beings. It's in you and it's in me. Everybody has a price. It doesn't have to be money. You know, if you make a decision in favor of a member of your own family, for example, that's a form of corruption. You know, people do it. So why I'm corrupt to a degree. You know, that's a given. You know, I'm not perfect, and anything that is not perfect is by definition corrupt. So there's varying degrees of corruption, and we all have it within us. It's a waste of time trying to stamp it out. But what you can do is create a situation through the market in which at least corruption is undesirable and punishable in a marketplace.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Changing tack a little bit, in 2021 we had the Scottish parliamentary elections. We spoke briefly about your personal political journey. I believe you moved away from the Scottish National Party a few years back. Can you elaborate on your reasoning?
Yeah, more than a few. I haven't been a member of that party since 1991, I think. And the writing was already on the wall then. I mean, my biggest issues at the time was the party was taking but it's hard for people to believe now, but they were once known as the Tartan Tories, the SNP. But once Alex Salmond took over, his strategy because we were always getting a pasting in Scotland from the Scottish Labour Party. The SNP, I can remember the time when the SNP regularly lost the deposits in elections. And the main beneficiary was the Scottish Labour Party. They generally beat the SNP hands down. So Alex Salmond's strategy was, well, let's woo the Labour vote. You know, what is it Labour voters are scared of? What is it they want? Let's emphasise the fact that partly the reason Scotland doesn't get to do what it wants to do is because of the Tories. And if you don't vote for independence, you're going to be saddled with the Tories, because England will vote Tory and you'll have to suck it up. So there was that point of it. Then there was the other point is, well, let's make ourselves even more to the left of Labour. You know, let's promise things that even the Labour Party aren't going to deliver. And one of the things that happened through that is people like myself saw the writing on the wall, they left. And there was an influx, a massive influx eventually of people from the left who, you know, even if Alex Salmond didn't believe this, even if he didn't believe his own propaganda, even if he thought, well, I'm not really a leftist, but it's good to actually woo the Labour vote and get people to vote for us by putting all this stuff out there. The effect is you suddenly get an influx of people who actually do believe that and are more left of centre. So the result was the Scottish National Party, over the coming years, took a massive swing to the left. And they are basically now a socialist party. Well, all the mainstream parties are socialist parties to some degree. But the SNP are massively socialist. They certainly are in their social policy. Their economic policy certainly leans that way as well. And that was, I could see that happening. So the SNP, as you see them today, are a party that I do not recognise. They certainly aren't nationalists. That's a joke. Even Nicola Sturgeon has said, you know, that she regrets the party being called the Scottish National Party. I mean, at least if they were nationalists, they'd be anti-EU and anti-globalist. But they're not. They're pro those things. They're very for those things. So that's why I left. Since that time, obviously, my political journey has gone on, and I no longer believe some of the things that I believed when I was in the SNP. But largely, that was the reason I left, and that's the reason why those are some of the reasons why I still despise them. You know, they're a leftist party who no longer even believe in independence. 1988, the SNP embraced what they called independence in Europe, which is an oxymoron. You can either be a sovereign independent nation state, or you can be a satrapy of the EU. And the SNP have decided that they want to be a satrapy of the EU. So that's no kind of independence in anybody's dictionary, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the EU has extended its political overall of its member states in the last couple of decades. You hit on something as well. They've moved towards a sort of a globalist thing. I mean, from where I'm, it's almost like a globalist capture. Certainly with Nicola Sturgeon. You know, you see her snapping at Hillary Clinton, and Devi Schreider's obviously been implanted into the government there. I mean, those are very concerning things, and she seems to operate on a similar style as like Justin Trudeau, is perhaps probably the way I see her. Only
well, they all come out the same factory.
She hasn't pushed the boundaries as much as he has. Yeah, it's certainly concerning. I mean, I enjoyed an appearance she did with Dan Wooten,
she can't push the boundaries as much as Trudeau. She'd love to. She can't push the boundaries as much as Trudeau because, whether she likes it or not, Scotland is still part of the UK. So she's not in a situation where she can do what Trudeau has done. But she'd love to be. And if Scotland was an independent country sorry, not an independent country, but if Scotland did break away from the UK entirely under the SNP, then she would act, you know, just the same way Jacinda Ardern did, just the same way that Trudeau did, and maybe even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, I enjoyed an appearance you did with Dan Wooten talking about Sturgeon making Scottish politics more toxic. The kid from the we spoke like a programmed robot.
Yeah.
Like we were saying earlier about political journeys, he seemed as though he'd just discovered politics and decided to pick his side, and has yet to realize much of the nuance of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So what's your view and the party's view on independence then?
Yeah, well, that guy you're talking about, yeah, he sounded like a complete hatchling. I don't know whether he wanted to give that impression, but anyway.
Austin, let's not talk about Boris Johnson for just 1 second. Let's talk about Nicola Sturgeon, your dear leader. Do you not concede that at times she is the one spreading toxicity, Austin?
Absolutely not. And I say I wouldn't accuse any Scottish political leader of doing that, of any political persuasion. I would say that Nicola Sturgeon, you know, especially when it comes to women, is that she's made it a central plank, you know, to encourage women into politics. She's made it a central plank to encourage other minorities into politics. I say the SNP is not just the only party doing that. If you look at the Scottish Conservative group in the Scottish Parliament, they are much more diverse. So I certainly wouldn't accuse any Scottish political leader of encouraging
English political leaders.
Persuasion.
You've accused, so that's Scottish moral exceptionalism. That's appalling. The party view on independence is the official party line. And by the way, we have unionists within the party, people who are pro-union. But the party position is we support self-determination. Self-determination is a basic libertarian principle, okay? Autonomy. So it seems to us that you can't really oppose independence. You know, independence is really what you want as a libertarian. You want as much independence as possible. However, it doesn't stop at Holyrood for us. Holyrood, unfortunately, is one of the most centralised. You know, the power is centralised in Holyrood more than any other country in Europe, and that has to change as well. So we're for the devolution of power away from Holyrood, out into the smallest local unit possible, down to the smallest local unit possible, and that would be the individual. So we want national independence. National sovereignty and freedom are not synonymous. They are not the same thing. North Korea is an independent sovereign nation state. But if anybody wants to try and tell me that it's free or people there have individual sovereignty and autonomy, then they're just wrong. So for us, primarily, individual sovereignty comes first. And through individual sovereignty, you'll automatically have national sovereignty or local sovereignty. And, you know, autonomous, sovereign, strong individuals make for autonomous, strong, and sovereign families. And families, strong, sovereign, autonomous families, make for strong communities. And ultimately, as night follows day, you will have an independent Scotland. I don't see the point of trying to enforce. Let's suppose the split was 55-45 in favour of independence. That's 45% of this population that you are enforcing a decision on. That's not very libertarian. So I believe in independence. I believed in UK independence from the EU. So I believe in Scottish independence. I believe in English independence. I believe in Yorkshire independence, Cornish independence, Shetland independence, Edinburgh independence, and Tam Laird independence overall. So it's about sovereignty, it's about self-determination. That's a core libertarian principle. But it's better from the bottom up rather than the top down. And we're into trying to educate people into that. It doesn't matter whether the guy who boots you up the backside is wearing a CU Jimmy hat or whether he's wearing a bowler hat. You know, it makes no difference whether it's Holyrood or whether it's Westminster. You know, government will be government, and it will tax you and it will spend your money on stuff that you disagree with. So there's more important issues than us. Yes, we agree with independence, but there's more important issues. We had a referendum. The referendum didn't go the way of the SNP because they screwed it up. Okay? Because they couldn't, partly because they couldn't shut their mouths about Europe. So they screwed that up. They said it was going to be a generational thing. Now they're still harping on about it. Forget it. Let's move on. Let's try and concentrate on devolving as much power away from Holyrood out to the local areas as we possibly can.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always kind of taken the position of it's best governments to rebel back against as possible. We were in a real bad situation when we had the EU, Holyrood, and Westminster to combat.
Yeah.
I mean, we've obviously slightly improved that situation. But I think I would say maybe a referendum with the actual options on the table to include the removal of Holyrood or the status quo or independent Scotland outside the EU or independent Scotland rejoining the EU might give a better cross-section of what people actually want. But I'd imagine that'd be a total mess and would just end up as a four-way split anyway. So it's kind of be a waste of time, essentially.
I mean, I voted yes to Scottish independence the last time. If there was another referendum, the way it's looking, I'd have to vote no, because independence isn't on the table. They're not talking about independence. They're using the word, but they're not talking about it. What they're talking about is exchanging one foreign master for another, exchanging Westminster for Brussels, and I don't see that as an improvement. I see that as worse. How is one voice, being one voice in 29 or whatever it is, 27? Can that be an improvement of being one voice in 4? It doesn't work. You know, it really doesn't work for me. That.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself in a strange position. I mean, I'm not inherently against the idea of Scottish independence, but I'm probably on the same kind of level as you. I mean, what if it was actual offering something different? But what really concerns me is the idea of it going through and us being left with the SNP as an all-powerful entity.
That's a scary thought.
With no checks and balances. I mean, that to me, that's even worse than them going into the EU. Just them being left on their own without anyone from Europe being able to give us assistance if it came down to it. Obviously, I'm in a slightly awkward position as well, being English, being up here. That changes my perspective on it a little bit as well, but not that it's really.
But
that's really
bear in mind, I can see why. But I mean, bear in mind, being part of the UK is no guarantee either of keeping government despotism in check, because the Tory government in England carried out draconian measures just exactly the same way. Okay, they got rid of them earlier, so it's like saying, well, this guy stopped beating me up quicker than this woman stopped beating me up, therefore they must be better. That's no guarantee. It's not to stop Jeremy Corbyn. Well, okay, there is now. He's not a player, but Keir Starmer could get into power in Westminster, and he could be every bit as draconian as Nicola Sturgeon. So being part of the union in of itself is no guarantee against government despotism.
Yeah, I suppose from my point of view, it's that it's a greater pool of people with roughly like-minded social status and interests without a language barrier that can unite and push back against said government. Whereas I suppose if we're in the EU, you've got language barriers to bring in people together against any sort of government despotism. So I suppose my default position is almost I'd prefer if we would just combat in Westminster and try to reform that, as opposed to having to go down the route of Scottish independence. But it like you say, it could have its positives, but not if it was completely under the control of the SNP.
Well, that's a given, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we're looking at local council elections coming up, and it's almost like councillors and foreign policy couldn't be further from relevant to one another. I suppose it's individual decision to put a name to a political party and all that comes with that at local and national level. So how does a Libertarian party interact on the world stage, assuming a Libertarian government in Holyrood?
Well, that's assuming we got into power. How do you act in the world? Well, we'd be doing our utmost to get ourselves out of as many treaties as possible.
In terms of things like war and whatnot.
In terms of what, sorry? So I didn't catch that.
For example.
Again, didn't catch it.
War, like Ukraine, Russia, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, first of all, we would do our utmost to disentangle ourselves from treaties like NATO. I mean, like, it's one thing getting out of the EU. There's about 60 other treaties that Britain's involved in that could be doing with going as well. NATO's one of them. I don't see that we need to be a part of NATO. And war is pretty much a racket. Self-defense is one thing. Getting involved in foreign conflicts is another. And that seems to be the only thing Britain's done in the last 20, 30 years. Whether it's Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and now we're saber-rattling, chest-beating over Ukraine. We had 2 world wars in which Britain pretty much bankrupted itself. We only just paid off the debt, I think, for the Second World War. We never, ever paid the debt for the First World War. And no good comes of it. So I think we'd be good to maintain a neutral position on foreign conflicts. That's the party position, foreign neutrality. Don't get involved in conflicts that don't involve you, don't concern you, and stick to your own national defence. You know, if you're attacked, then by all means defend yourself robustly. I'm all for a robust policy if it involves, let's suppose, British citizens overseas were being maltreated or whatever deliberately, then I suppose there's a case for some sort of action. But largely, it's to do with your own, the defence of your own borders, which, ironically, the government doesn't seem to be very good at anyway, defending their own borders. If you're going to have borders, you have to defend them, and the government doesn't. We have invasions all the time. It's just that the invaders are unarmed. So stick to our own defence, stick to our own borders, and don't get involved in foreign wars. It's none of our business. It's not worth a penny of British taxpayers' money. It's not worth one drop of British servicemen's or women's blood, in our view.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Jorgensen got almost 2 million votes. Does the Scottish League have any relationship with the American counterpart?
Not really. I mean, on Twitter, we have, we follow various, whether it's the New Hampshire Libertarian Party or the Libertarian Party of Texas or whatever. We follow these groups on Twitter and so forth, and we have some contact. I mean, I've met Tom Woods, I've met Robert Murphy, but there's no official line of communication really. Far be it from me to tell the American Libertarian Party what to do. It just seems to me that they've gone a bit bleeding heart libertarian I think they've done that vote chasing. I think maybe one of the reasons that Jorgensen got so many votes is because they've done that thing. They've done the Alex Salmond thing. Let's woo. Why are socialists not voting for us? Oh, they think we're nasty, and like, okay, let's be a little less nasty. Let's not mention that. Let's not mention this. Let's change that a little bit. You know, let's be a little bit more touchy-feely and say, oh, look, we believe that as well. That's all good until you start to get an influx of people who aren't really libertarians into the Libertarian Party, and then things start to change. So it's better to stick to principle rather than vote chase. And I know, you know, you are part of the political process. This is something you take into account as votes, but if you focus on it, and I think the Libertarian Party in America did focus on it, then it only forces you to change your policies. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think you're better to stick to principle and convince people that's the honourable position. That's the position that's beneficial to them. You know, if you don't believe in your principles, you're not going to convince other people of them. So we would rather just stick. We're a party of principle. Stick to those principles. It's not about. It's not the main focus of what we do. Is not about getting votes. It'd be dead easy. All I would need to do to increase my votes tenfold would be just to suddenly promise people free stuff, you know, and start adopting a more socialist stance and things. Well, that's not what we're that's not what we're about, you know. So I'm not prepared to do these things in order just to get votes.
Yeah, ironically, that should actually increase your vote because you should be considered as somebody who's principled. But people don't seem to want to vote for that. They just want to, like you say, vote for the free laptop or whatever it was that we were meant to be getting last time around. I see Dave Smith, the comedian.
Sorry, the irony there is
challenge for
the irony there is.
Sorry, Andy.
Seldom do these things materialize. You know, the government promises you, let's say, 20 things it's going to do. We'll give you free laptops, free bikes, free travel on the buses if you're under 25, which is age discrimination, incidentally. But they promise all these things, and then they seldom deliver. And even when they do deliver, it's nowhere near, you know, it's like this is half the amount that they said they were going to do, or it's crap, you know. So it doesn't even deliver on its promises to bribe you with your own money, or not properly, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was asking about the American example because, as I was going to say, you've got people like Dave Smith, who I believe was challenging the newer principles of the Libertarian Party over there. And also, well, more famously, Joe Rogan, I think, votes Libertarian. And there's almost an argument to be made that, I mean, if a proper breakthrough could happen in America, it's possible that you could almost off the success of that if they actually made some strides. I think wasn't the governor of Texas a Libertarian about 20 years back?
I could not rightly say. There are some prominent libertarian politicians. I mean, obviously, Ron Paul was the most famous one, although he ran as a Republican a lot of the time. But he is a libertarian. The success of the American Libertarian Party, it depends at what cost. You know, if they're successful at the cost of cashing in their principles, then that's not good to anybody. You know, we're not. It's not going to do anything for us. I don't think so, unless we follow suit, and that's not going to happen. I know that Dave Smith and the Mises Caucus have been doing their best to try and bring, in their view, the American Libertarian Party back to principles. But we'll see how that goes. I mean, I've been disappointed. I was disappointed in Jorgensen. I was disappointed in Gary Johnson as well. I thought they were poor candidates personally. But again, hopefully I won't tell America what to do in its house, and they'll do me the same favor and not tell me what to do in mine. So I'll let them crack on with whatever it is they're doing, and I'll concentrate on what's happening here in Scotland.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That said, unfortunately, we've got globalization, and the spread of ideas certainly comes out of America. So, I mean, if you take in 2020, we saw what happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. That spread as far as here as well. So how did the notion of defunding the police sit with libertarianism?
Well, defund anything if it's from government. You know, I mean, like, defunding the police is not quite the same as getting rid of the police. However, if you're going to have government, which I don't necessarily agree that you do have to have government as an ANCAP, but if you're going to have government, then you have to decide what it is that government is, what its function is. Now, one of its functions, if you're a libertarian, is to protect the individual rights and liberties and property of the individual. So in order to do that, you're going to have a police force. And if it's not private, then it has to be government funded. So therefore, it makes no sense to cut back on police funding if that's not appropriate. If the police are overfunded, then that's one thing. I think probably the best thing to do would be to get rid of the police union. You know, make it, it should be compulsory for any policeman to be a member of the federation or a union or anything like that. And I think one of the biggest issues, both here and in the US, is the unions, is the police union. Time after time, they stand up for corrupt cops, for incompetent cops, and keep them in their jobs, and they lobby for more money, and they get more money, and it has to be shaken up in some way. So while as an ANCAP, I'm all for defunding the police, but with my Libertarian Party hat on, if you're going to have a police force, then it has to be adequately funded, right? That's if it's going to be a state police force. If you want to privatize it all, that's another matter. That's something you can look at. But as long as you think the state should be involved in policing, then it has to be funded. So you can't defund it. So you have to make your mind up which one it is that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I was saying earlier about the economy and monopolies, something I can't almost wrap my head around is like, if you've got the idea of freedom to form communities, doesn't that ultimately naturally result in the formation of states and governments anyway, because people will want to pool resources? Or is that just a bit of a lack of imagination on my part?
I think it has to result in that. I mean, it can begin like that. If you break away from like centralized government, you start forming communities, blah, blah, blah. There will be community governments. The difference between, let's say, the government in my area, which is Inverleith in Edinburgh, and the government in Leith Walk, which is a neighbouring ward. If I don't like the government in Inverleith, I can at least it's not a major upheaval. I don't have to learn another language. I don't have to spend a lot of money moving. I don't have to necessarily get another job. I don't have to move my all I have to do is move to the next neighborhood and live under the control of that government. So that encourages small local government community governments to at least compete with each other, because if they see people moving away and they see businesses moving out, then they have to say to themselves, okay, why is this happening? What are we doing that's forcing people to move to the other neighborhood? And that encourages more people to move to the kind of neighborhoods that most suits them, you know. And I've nothing against people wanting to live in a Sharia neighborhood, providing they don't enforce that Sharia law on people who are not subscribed to it. So you can, it's not that necessarily that you won't have governance, you just won't have a government in the same sense. Governance would be carried out by facilities management companies who you subscribe to, or unsubscribe to in an anarcho-capitalist situation. Anarchy doesn't mean that there won't be governance. It just means there won't be a government in the same sense that the state is a government with monopoly on force and violence. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. I heard you say on another podcast debate, libertarianism is not a destination; it's a journey.
Yeah.
And I've seen some criticism of libertarianism as some kind of like capitalist hippie utopia thing, but just as with socialism, the movement would probably settle for governments to be nudged in the policy direction of libertarianism. And how can your party exert that sort of nudging influence at the minute?
Well, it's a difficult battle. It's an uphill battle, and the only thing you can do is stick to your principles and keep hammering them out. Look at other ways. Try and encourage people to look. It starts with the individual and ends with the individual. If you're not prepared to make your life a little bit more difficult by keeping using cash, get rid of some of the apps on your phone. Get rid of your phone, right? And use a dumb phone or use some other method. Be very careful about who you subscribe to and unsubscribe to. Change your bank. Don't bank online or use, don't shop and don't use Amazon. There's all sorts of decisions that you can take as an individual to stop empowering the system. And if you're not prepared to take them, I think you're wasting your time waiting on government to do it for you. I mean, it's a long hard shot, right? It's a long shot to think that the Scottish Libertarian Party is going to put up 19 candidates in this council election. Even if we got them all elected, the impact that we're going to have is minimal, to say the least. At least it's good. At least it shows the flag. At least we're there. But the impact's going to be minimal. So it's the only thing that I can compare it to is long ago the Fabian Society proposed the Long March through the institutions, and the socialists have been extremely successful at that. They have captured the state. They've captured local government. They've captured the education system. They've captured the academia. And they've captured the civil service, but it didn't happen overnight. It was, as they described it, the long march through the institution. It took them 50 years or so to do that, maybe more. The idea that we would achieve, something similar in a matter of a couple of years, 5 years, is folly. That is utopian thinking at its worst. I'm not optimistic. That's not to say that there isn't hope. I fight this fight because I believe it's right, not necessarily because I think I can win it. And if you don't fight, then the other side has automatically won. So I fight, I try to hold back the tide, make some noise, kick, scream, do what you can, try and get some people elected. But in your own life, try and fight. I'm a big fan of agorism in that sort of sense. This Samuel Edward Konkin, the third thing of alternative economies, whether it's cryptocurrency or anything else, shopping within online business groups that are all libertarian, starting your own local currency or getting that established and accept it amongst ourselves, like the Brixton pound or whatever. I know these things have limited success, but they're all trial and error, and they're all a good thing in of themselves, is to try and diversify, to try and devolve power away from the state, ways of trying to make the state as irrelevant as possible in your own life. So it's a two-pronged attack. One, try and achieve something through the political process, even though that process is completely corrupt, and the dice are loaded against you at every turn, but try at least. And on the other hand, trying to find ways of making government irrelevant in your life as much as possible by not subscribing and not, you know, we're all lured in by the convenience, you know. I mean, how many libertarians do you know who don't use cash, you know? And it's like, well, look, can you even just on a Friday, you know, can you even just use cash to keep it alive? Because, you know, one thing we haven't talked about yet is CBDCs. And once we go down that road, once government gets the capture of your finances, and it's programmable, centralized banking digital currencies will be programmable. So that it will be programmed in what you can and cannot spend that money on and how much of it you can spend. And people go, oh, well, you know, as long as you're not doing anything wrong. Well, remember, what is wrong is nebulous. The government can decide at any given time what is right and what is wrong. Maybe being a Christian will be wrong and the government will shut you down. Maybe being gay will suddenly be wrong and the government will shut you down. Can't see it, but it could happen. You know, who knows what kind of government gets into power. There's all sorts of things that the government can decide on a whim what is wrong and shut you down. So we have about a 2-year, 3-year window, I think, in which to prevent that happening. But if CBDCs go through, along with the online safety bill, or online harms, whatever they choose to call it, which just means censorship of the internet, I think we're pretty much stuffed. Out with an armed insurrection, I don't see how you could possibly roll back the state after that. But I hope I'm wrong.
I'm going to have to go Google the Brixton pound now. I've not heard about that.
Yeah, do so.
But yeah, no, I think I've kind of unfortunately come to the same kind of conclusions as you have just by watching all the pieces fall into place. I mean, I've got long-term plans, you know, to get a piece of land in the Highlands and go and move up there and try and become completely self-sustainable because, like you say, if the central bank digital currency thing comes in, I don't see how we're going to be able to participate without it. I mean, I've got a friend who has had to go to China to work every now and then. And he's basically says it is everything that we think it is and more in terms of the control systems in place. And there's certainly, you know, a move by the elite power brokers to consolidate their power. And this is I mean, it's happened throughout the course of history, but they finally actually have to fully implement it. I mean, it's not like we've not seen it in dystopian films non-stop, but I mean, I don't think, like you said earlier, I don't think people can bring themselves to actually believe that it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that is it's a difficult fight, like you said, to make people comprehend what it actually means for them. But
yeah, people would rather not think about it. You know, it's too scary. It's way too scary to contemplate. But I'm one of these people who I will stare it in the face and go like, look, this is what's going to happen. But you feel like Pandora, you know, not Pandora, was it Cassandra, you know, who was cursed with the ability to see the future, but also the inability to convince anybody that it was about what was going to happen. I just try my best to do that. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm in agreement with you in terms of, you know, getting yourself a piece of land or all clubbing in and getting a piece of land and living in a libertarian commune or whatever community. But as long as the government has all the guns and all the police and all the soldiers, they'll just come and take it off you. You know, they'll take your little piece of Libertopia away from you. They'll certainly find a way of taxing you. You know, I know it happened in America. Certain groups of people decide to just go off and live and say, look, we're not interested in any of your government amenities. We're just going to live in our own piece of land. And the government finds some way of effing with them, you know, of coming in and taking what belongs to them, because the government's the only force. I mean, people talk about monopolies. I know of no monopoly greater or worse than government. You know, they have the monopoly on the legitimate, close quotes, use of force and violence. And while that's the case, you know, we're at their mercy. But I'm doing my best to try and roll that back. It's a tough fight. It's pretty much most of the time an unrewarding fight, although I get the reward of my belief in that what I'm doing is right and will be beneficial not only to individuals but to everybody in the end, because what is good for the individual is automatically good for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, the more the government unmasks its intentions, the better advertisement it is for you, and the party, as it were. This was a thing for me. I didn't know you guys actually existed until I intentionally tried to find the Scottish Libertarian Party. So I mean, it's good progress that you're, you know, appearing on GB News now. I mean, that should increase the awareness and whatnot. But regardless of that, what's the expectation going into the council elections? Do you think you could win a seat or two?
Well, look, we whittled down a list. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of accusations going about on Twitter and so forth that, you know, we had 170 candidates at one point. Absolute nonsense. The most we ever had was a possible about 40 at the most. We whittled that down to 20, and I'm saying whittled it down. Some people dropped out at the last minute. The target always was 20 because that's about as much as our admin can handle, you know. We're a small party. We've got about 300 members. So as a percentage, I think 20 candidates is actually not too bad, you know, for a small party with no funding other than from our own membership. So we've got 19 candidates is what we have throughout Scotland. We have about 6 in Edinburgh. So that's thousands upon thousands of ballot papers with Scottish Libertarian Party on there. So at least a lot of people will be exposed to who we are. You know, it's very cheap advertising, you know, to get your name on something that people will be looking at, to get your party name on there is good in and of itself. You know, so people, and we all have a bit of a social media presence. People will be aware that there is a Libertarian candidate in their ward. For those who can't vote for a Scottish Libertarian Party candidate in Scotland, we're urging them to vote for the Freedom Alliance, who share some principles with us. They have about 12 candidates, none of which are in the areas we're standing. So if anybody looks on www.scottishlibertarians.com on our announcement on candidates, all our candidates are listed, where they're standing, and all Freedom Alliance's candidates are listed as well. So, yeah, we hope to get some traction out of it. Whether or not we get a councillor, I hope we do. But I think it's dream world to think we're up against a behemoth. We're up against a Leviathan. However, it can happen. You know, if the British National Party could get candidates in a local election way back, you know, anything can happen. Independents sometimes get elected. So I'm quietly optimistic that we could achieve something. But even the fact that we have 19 candidates out there and running, and some of those, quite a few of those are active candidates as well. You know, I myself am running in Inverleith. I will be an active candidate, so the name will be getting out there, and that in of itself is a good thing for us. But it'd be great if we could get a local councillor. We actually had a local councillor, Sandy Wallace, who was Scottish Libertarian councillor. He crossed the floor from the Conservative Party in Aberdeenshire. However, he won't be running again this election, so we'll probably lose that. We will lose that, so we won't have a councillor anymore. But hopefully, we'll gain another one somewhere. That's just being hopeful. I don't expect it, but I hope we do. Expect the worst, hope for the best.
Have you got? Yeah, have you got much? Are any of the candidates in the Aberdeen just now. I mean, that's where I am. So
any candidates where? Sorry,
curious if there was anyone local in Aberdeenshire or
yeah, there are.
City.
There's two in Aberdeen. I know there's one Concorth, and in fact, if you just give me a minute, I can tell you exactly where they're standing in Aberdeenshire. A couple of seconds, actually. Anybody can check this out if you go to Scottish Libertarian Party. Sorry, ScottishLibertarians.com, and on our front page, there's news 2022 local candidate election, and all our candidates are listed. And right at the top there, you have Aberdeenshire. Oren Katz is our candidate in Torry, Ferry Hill area. Bryce Hope, he's a very active party member. Bryce Hope in Concorth, Nig and Cove. And further out in the sticks, we have Stuart Whitby, who's Strathbogie and Howe of Athard, right? Or Huntly, sorry, Huntly, Strathbogie and Howe of Athard would be the right thing. So yeah, he's out that way. So there you go. That's what you have in that.
I think they've probably got a reasonable chance because I mean Aberdeen. Sorry, on you go.
That's I was finished.
Oh, all right. So I think there's a bit of a. I mean, I think they've probably got a reasonable chance. I mean, certainly the council election system. I mean, plus, I mean, half of Aberdeenshire is probably qualitative. So I mean, if they manage to write off the Conservative Party ideas and push towards more ideas, that could be good.
Well, I think
with any luck. I mean, unfortunately,
with the Conservative Party, what it has in its favour is also what it has not in its favour. The Conservative Party, or the Conservative Party, because they're not Conservatives, the only thing they have going for them, the only principle that they cling to, like a dying man to a piece of flotsam and jetsam on the ocean, you know, is the union. Right, that's it. You know, take the union away, and they are bereft. Right, they have nothing to offer. They're hopeless as an opposition party in Scotland. So, I think that the issue that we have there is unionists are always going to vote Conservative. That's pretty much it. You know, and there are a hardcore unionist following in Scotland, and they are going to vote for the Conservatives. That's pretty much it. That said, I mean, we do get defectors, and you know, we have got unionists within the Scottish Libertarian Party, and I think if Scottish Conservatives, actual real Conservatives, realise that the Scottish Conservative Party is one, not going to save the union, two, not going to save them from the SNP. You know, I think if they realise that, then they might vote for the Scottish Libertarians. But a lot of Scottish Conservatives are pretty much just socialists, you know, with a posher accent, you know, and just like waving a union flag about. But there's not much difference really. There are at the outer edges. So they're a puzzlement to me. You know, they could be so much more. They're just a shambles. I mean, two leaders now. The leader before this one, Ruth Davidson, well competent enough in terms of leading a party, she was basically a Gramscian Euro-communist. You know, so what the hell was she going to offer anybody, you know, to the right or centre on the political spectrum? Nothing. A woman who chuntered on about lived experiences, like, you know, like a socialist, straight out the Fabian, you know, book of, you know, anecdotes, you know, like, oh, we've got to respect people's lived experiences. Oh, you know, give me strength, like, you know. And then she's a baroness, you know, Baroness Gramscian Euro-communist. So there you go. So that, yeah, the Conservative, the Conservative Party, the commie cons in Scotland are a shambles, unfortunately. So there we go.
Yeah, I mean, about a year ago, I interviewed the local the local MSP Conservative candidate. I also interviewed what is now the local MSP, the SNP, Gillian Martin. But I mean, I got reasonably friendly with a Conservative candidate, and he actually asked me to stand.
Oh, they're affable enough.
Yeah, he actually asked me to stand as a Conservative councillor in a by-election last autumn, but I just couldn't bring myself to, despite occasionally voting for them based purely on the union thing, I just couldn't bring myself to put my name to them for the rest of all the reasons you just mentioned, because I mean they don't essentially believe in anything.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, it's painful to watch. I mean, it happens with all the mainstream parties. You just hope that people have enough attention span with politics now, that enough people have been exposed to politics because of COVID, that they might go on a bit of a journey and then ultimately come to some principled conclusions instead of just swallowing what they're spoon-fed by the TV, which is unfortunately what most people do. But
yeah,
hey-ho. So with that in mind, you've mentioned a website. Where else can people hear a bit more from yourself, or perhaps some recommendations for libertarian reading?
Well, the website has all sorts of information on the party there, and further reading as well. But you can follow us at Skull Libertarian on Twitter as well. And that will update you on everything everything that's happening at the moment. So those are the two main sources of information for us at the moment. We are also on, I believe, on Insta. I think we're on. We are on Facebook. We have an official Facebook page as well, and you can search for that. But those aren't updated quite as frequently as the web page and the Twitter page. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Getter. I'm sure if you search for Tam Laird on Getter, but I've got to be honest, I haven't used it. Much.
Okay, well, best of luck in the election, and thanks for spending the time with me today.
No, it's been great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Join us next time for the Political Darkside podcast.
It's a disaster. Whose idea was that? It's just ridiculous.
Available on iTunes, Google, and Spotify.
For more information, visit politicaldarkside.com.